Hey, hello friends, and welcome to Retro Portal Studio. And in today's video we're going to be creating this awesome bottom drawer in Flutter, which comes up as you swipe up on the screen and goes down when you swipe down. And you can notice that the background becomes blurred as the dialog comes on the screen and goes away when the dialog is removed from the screen. So this is quite a nice effect, and you're going to learn how to use positioned elements on the screen and how to animate those positioned widgets. Moreover, you're going to learn about using gestures in Flutter, and at the end of this video I'm going to give you a custom class that I've just created for this project, which can help you in handling gestures in a much better way. It's going to make things quite easy. It's going to give you 4 simple functions to detect when the user swipes up and when the user swipes down, and left or right also. So let's get started. Okay, so right now I'm in a simple Flutter project that just have this login screen, which is a stateful widget because we have to keep the state of that drawer. So this login screen has a stack as the first child of the body property. So because we have this stack, we can layer the widgets on top of each other. So this stack is really important to create that sort of effect that I showed you in the demo. So using this stack, we can layer the widgets on top of each other. So at the first child, I have this single child scroll view that is going to be the base layout for all the stack elements. And after this scroll view, single child scroll view, we're going to add another widget that we're going to create right now. That is going to be a simple menu widget. So I'm just going to comment this here, placement, to remember where we want to place that widget. So we're going to come down here and we're going to create another widget that is called menu widget. So the menu widget is going to be a stateless widget because it itself does not need to manage any states. So it's going to be a stateless widget. I'm going to call it menu widget. And I'm going to come in this build function and I'm going to create 2 variables, that is for width and height. Okay, so after adding the width and the height, the first thing that we need to do is we need to give some constraints to the container and also a child element. So for the child element, we're going to give it a column because we want to lay out our elements in a vertical fashion. So we need to add children to this column. And also for the container, we need to add particular constraints, that is the width and the height. So we want the dialog, the bottom dialog, to cover up the space that is the full width of the screen and approximately 1/3 of the height of the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to give it the width, that is the width that we have just created here. And for the height, what I'm going to give it is just height divided by 3, that is 1/3 of the height of the screen. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add some widgets to its column. So I'm just going to skip over that part so you don't have to watch me write all that stuff because those are just the elements. Okay, so right now I have added a few elements to this column. That is a simple icon that is the arrow up, and a simple text that says social logins that has some text size and font properties, and also a simple text again, and a size box to give some space, and a simple sized box, and a material button for those 3 buttons, that is log in with Google, log in with Facebook, and log in with Twitter. Okay, so now that we have created this menu widget, what we need to do right now is we need to position this in the stack that is in the login screen here. So right now we're in a stack and we have already added the comment where we need to place this menu widget. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some positioned widget here. And the positioned widget is going to position the element in the stack above the single child scroll view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this menu widget as a child of positioned widget. And I'm going to give it a position of bottom, that is 0. And I'm going to give it a position of left, that is 0. So what this positioned widget will do is it's going to position the menu widget to take a place that is at 0 distance from the bottom and 0 distance from the left in the stack widget. So when I'm going to run the app and go to the emulator, so you can see that the menu widget is attached to the bottom, that is 0 pixel from the bottom and 0 pixels from the left. So right now there are some modifications that we need to do in the menu widget that is to add some padding, and also need to add a background color to the container. So I'm going to come down to this menu widget, and in the container I'm going to add a color that is going to be colors.white, and also I need to add some padding. So to this column I'm going to add some padding, and I'm not going to keep this at all. I'm going to keep this at symmetrical, and I need to add a vertical padding of approximately 2.0 and a horizontal padding that is going to be of approximately 10.0, and I think that will do. So I'll just run the app again. Okay, and the problem with that is the text is gone because the color of the background does not need to be white. We need to keep a deep orange accent that I kept in the demo also. So when I run the app, you can see that we have this nice bottom layout, and I also need to add some curves to this container. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this container in a new widget that is the clip or rect, and add some border radius to it. I'm going to run the app, and you can see that we have the curves here. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to move this menu towards the bottom of the screen. We need to move this menu so that only this portion, this social logins and the other line, only this portion of the menu is visible on the screen at start. So for that, what we can do is we can come to this positioned widget. What we need to do is we need to decrease this bottom. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a negative height that is going to be of media query dot off context dot height dot size dot height divided by 3, and that exactly matches with the height of the container. So there's going to be a problem. So when I run the code, you can see that the layout is gone from the screen, because we don't really need to match the exact height of the container with the bottom of the positions. What we need to do is we need to add some more height to the container. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate some height. That is the height of the icon, that is 20, the height of the text, that is going to be 15, the height of the other text, that is going to be 10. So that totals out to be 20 plus 15 plus 10, that is 45, and some other height that is of the sized box. So instead of adding 20, I'm going to add just 10 from that, so that totals out to be 55. So we're going to add an approximate height of 60 to the container. Okay, so now you can see that the menu is hidden below the screen, and the only portion that you can see right now is the social logins and the line below it. So there's also an annoying white line below that, so let me take a look at that. So when we come up here, and okay, so we can see that the stack itself does not have any height. So I'm going to add a container and give it a height here. I'm going to give it a height, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a simple variable here that is going to be a double height is equal to media query dot off context dot size dot height, and we can add the height here. That gives the height to the stack also. And also when we come down here, what we can do is we can replace this media query line with the height that we just declared. And let me run the app again. And you can see that that height problem is gone, and the menu is touching the bottom of the screen. Okay, so now that we have positioned the widget on the screen, that is in this bottom portion, we need to find a way to bring this up on the screen and to move the widget down at this current position. So for that, we need to detect the gestures, and for that, we need to come up here, and above this container, we need to add GestureDetector. So I'm going to wrap this container with a GestureDetector. Okay, so the GestureDetector gives us with a number of properties, that is on tap, on force press, and all these cool things. It gives us the properties of on vertical drag, on horizontal drag, and all these things. But the property that we're interested in is this on pan end. So this on pan end property gives us a function that gives us the details with which the user panned on the screen, or the user scrolled on the screen. Okay, so using these details, we can detect the velocity with which the user scrolled on the screen. So let me just debug print the values. So I'm going to use details dot velocity dot pixels per second. So this is basically an offset that tells us with how much speed the does the user scrolled on the screen. So that is calculated in pixels per second. And we can get the dy, that is the change in the pixels on the y-axis, because we need to detect the swipe up and swipe down. So I'm going to convert that to string to get the value in the debug console. Okay, so when I run the app now and I open this emulator, you can see when I swipe up on the screen and down on the screen, it gives us the velocity with which the user has scrolled on the screen. And by using this velocity, we can detect the scroll up and scroll down. So for that, let us just create a simple boolean here that can tell us whether the dialog is open or closed. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a simple bool that is the show bottom menu that is initially set to false. And we can come down here. So let us create a new variable that is the threshold, and we can just create that up here. We can create a simple variable that is threshold, and we can keep this at 100. And what this threshold is going to be, that this is the minimum amount of pixels per second that the user has to scroll to be detected as a scroll up and to be detected as a scroll down. Okay, so now what we can do is we can simply add a simple if-else statement and use these details to detect the velocity. Details.velocity.pixels per second.dy, and if that is greater than the threshold, then we can set the state and say that the dialog should be closed, because when you go down, when the user swipes down, the dy increases. So here we can say that the show bottom menu should be set to false, and else if the details.velocity.pixels per second.dy is less than negative of threshold, then we can set the state and say that the show bottom menu should be true. That means the dialog should be visible. So at this point, when I run the app again and I come up here, nothing happens because we have not adjusted the positioned widget below according to the show bottom menu. Okay, so what we need to do here is we need to change this bottom property, and we need to add a ternary operator, and we need to say if the show bottom menu is true, then what we need to do is we need to show the dialog box, that is, we need to keep it at 0, and if the show bottom menu is false, we need to give the exact height as before. So basically what we're doing here is if the show bottom menu is true, we're setting the bottom to 0, and if the show bottom menu is false, we're hiding the menu, only showing the certain portions of the dialog. So when I run the app again and we come to this emulator, you can see that when I swipe down, the dialog goes down, and when I swipe up, the dialog comes up. So there is some issue with the bottom portion here, and this is because we have set the bottom to 0 when we need to show the dialog. We don't really need to do that. We need to pass -60 here, and this is because we have added some extra height to our menu widget. This is because of which we have to reduce that height from the bottom also. So when I run the app again, and I see here, you can see that the menu is working perfectly. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to animate this positioned widget to make it a bit smoother. So for that, what we can do is we can replace this positioned widget with an animated positioned. And this animated positioned provides implicit animations to the positioned widget. Okay, so a property that this animated positioned requires is the duration, which signifies the amount of duration that this animation should take. So we're going to pass a duration of milliseconds, that is 200. And when I run the app again, you can see when I swipe up, the animation starts and stops. And you can also add a bit of curve to this animation to make it much smoother. And for the curve, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use curves dot ease in and out. And when I run the app again, you can see that the animation is a bit smoother than before. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to blur the background when the dialog comes up, and we need to make the background visible when the dialog goes down. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a widget that is called BackdropFilter, and this BackdropFilter applies a filter to all the widgets that come below it. So in this case, all the widgets that are above the BackdropFilter are going to come below in the widget hierarchy on the screen. So basically this backdrop filter will be applied on the whole of the single child scroll view and the container and the stack itself. So in the backdrop filter, what I'm going to do is, so in the filter property, I'm going to use a simple image filter of blur, image filter.blur, and for the sigma x, I'm going to pass a value of 5.0, and sigma y, I'm going to pass the value of 5.0, and I think this is going to be fine. And other than this, I'm going to add a child property for the backdrop filter, which is going to be basically transparent or any color that you want. So in this case, I'm going to add a simple container, and the container is going to be of colors.black to give it a basic tint, and I'm going to change its opacity with opacity, and I'm going to give it a 0.2 opacity right here and a comma here. So at this point, when I run the app, you can see that the blur comes on the screen at the starting, and the swipe gestures work fine, but this blur should be only there when we swipe up the dialog. So for that, what we can do is we can change the opacity of this backdrop filter. So for that, what we can do is we can add an opacity widget here, and the opacity should be changed according to show bottom menu, and if the show bottom menu is true, we need to add the opacity of 0.0, and if the show bottom menu is false, we need to add the opacity of 1.0. And for the child of the opacity widget, we're going to add this backdrop filter and add a comma here, and when I run the app, you can see that okay, so the effect is working reverse. So when you show the bottom menu, we need to change this to 1.0, and for the other case, we need to change this to 0.0. And when I run the app again, the effect is working fine, and it blurs the background as soon as the dialog comes up, and when I swipe down, the blur goes away. So if you also want to animate this opacity, we can use AnimatedOpacity here, AnimatedOpacity, and it works fine. The only difference is we need to add duration, and we're going to add the same duration of milliseconds 200. And when I run the app, you can see that the opacity is animating nicely, and when we swipe up, the background becomes blur, and we have this nice bottom drawer coming up, and when we swipe down, the drawer goes down. Okay, so just for the recap for what we have done till now is that we started the tutorial by creating this bottom menu, that is the menu widget, which has a particular height, that is the height of the screen divided by 3 plus these 60 pixels, so 60 points, let's say. So basically these 60 points come from this icon, the 2 text fields, and the sized box. We have taken a bit proportion from the sized box, not the exact height. So that totals out to be 60. And we have used this height because what we wanted to do was when we swipe down, we want this portion to be visible, and when we swipe up, we want all of the drawer to be visible. So for making this small portion visible when we swipe down, we had to add this extra height pixels to the container itself. So this is the menu widget, and when we add this menu widget to the screen itself, that is the stack in the login screen, we used positioned widget, and to add the animations to this positioned widget, we use AnimatedPositioned. The way how this positioned widget works is that we have this simple gesture detection that is getting done up here, is that we have wrapped the container with a gesture detector. So basically in the gesture detector, we're going to use onPennEnd property that gives us the details of the velocity. So by detecting the velocity with which the user swipes on the screen, we are setting a boolean, that is show bottom menu, to false and true. So basically when the user swipes up, we set the show bottom menu to true, and when the user swipes down, we set the show bottom menu to false. So depending upon this show bottom menu, the animated positioned widget changes its bottom property. So when the user shows the bottom menu, we set it to -60, and when the user hides the bottom menu, we set it to the previous property, that is the minus height divided by 3. That is 1/3 of the screen height. So other than the positioned widget, we have also added a blur to the background when the user swipes up and the dialog comes on the screen. So for achieving this, we are using BackdropFilter, and we have added an image filter with a blur of sigma x and sigma y with a property of 5.0. So other than this, the BackdropFilter has a child of container, which is of black color, which adds this black tint to the background. You can see when I swipe down the dialog, the tint goes away, and when I swipe up, the BackdropFilter comes up and there is a black tint coming on the screen. So this is because of the color property of the container. So the way we're animating this backdrop is by setting the opacity widget by exactly using the animated opacity, and we're setting the opacity to 1.0 when there's the dialog on the screen, and we're setting this to 0.0 when the dialog goes away. Okay, so as I told you in the starting of the video, I have created this simple class to help you with the gesture detection. That is for the 4 particular gestures, that is swipe up, swipe down, swipe left, and swipe right. So you can just basically add this class to your own project by adding this to the lib folder or any other package that you are organizing your project in. So the way you can use this is by changing the gesture detector to custom gesture detector, and this gesture detector has properties of its own. So what you can do is you can add those properties. So the basic property is the axis that you need to add. So the axis property is given to you by these 4 constants, that is the axis x, axis y, and axis both, in case you need to detect both the x and y velocities. So in the main file, you can add an axis by adding custom gesture detector.axis of y. That is useful to us in this case. And other than this, we need to add a velocity, which is going to be the threshold that we were detecting earlier. So in this case, this is going to be a threshold variable, and I need to change this to double. And what we need to do now is we need to add 2 methods that correspond to our axis. That in this case, it has the y-axis, so we're going to use on swipe up and on swipe down. So I'm going to add on swipe up, and in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set state, and in the set state, we're going to set the show bottom menu to true, and I'm going to copy this state and add a property of on swipe down, and in this I'm going to set the show bottom menu to false. So when I run the app again and swipe up on the screen, the dialog comes up and the dialog goes down when I swipe down. Okay, so let's say we have a case in which you have provided the wrong axis here. That means you have provided axis x, and the functions that you have provided were of on swipe up and on swipe down. So in this case, when I run the app again and I open the run terminal and I swipe up and down on the screen and I swipe left and right, so it gives you a definition error that you need to define the functions for the given axis. So it gives you a prompt that you have not given the accurate properties to the custom gesture detector. So I think this class will help you a lot in your gesture detection for swipe up, swipe down, and the swipe right and swipe left. So I hope you learned much in this tutorial. And if you like the tutorial, please hit the like button and the subscribe button to keep up to date with the new Flutter content that is coming on Retro Portal Studio. So see you next time. Peace.